Hey everyone, Pastor Brandon here. Just blessed to be bringing you today's Heart to Home daily devotional. And this morning I wanted to talk to you about something that we find, a scene that we find in the book of 1 Samuel. We've been going through that Fusion Fellowships on Wednesday nights. But King Saul had become determined to kill David, and he had been hunting him down throughout the wilderness. And David had been bouncing around from cave to cave and stronghold to stronghold, fleeing from Saul. And by the time we get to chapter 24, Saul had made 14 attempts on David's life. David had to flee his home. He had to leave his wife. He had to leave his best friend and hide as a fugitive in these different caves in the wilderness, right? And it would be one thing if David did something to deserve this, but he didn't. David never did one thing wrong to Saul to deserve the kind of treatment he was getting from Saul. In 1 Samuel chapter 24, David and his men had been hiding out in a cave, and Saul, with his 3,000 chosen men, were tracking David down. And the Bible tells us that Saul had went into one of these caves to attend to his personal needs. And so Saul would have went into this cave alone, right? And it just so happened that the cave in which Saul went into was the cave that David and his men were hiding in. And so David's men encouraged him. Now's your chance, David. The Lord has given you this opportunity to finally kill Saul. God's delivered him into your hands. And so David pulls out his sword and he sneaks up behind Saul. But he doesn't kill him. Rather, he cuts a piece of his robe off. And Saul has no idea that David did this. But when Saul would learn of it, he would know that David could have plunged that sword right through him. And I wanted to take a look at verses 5 through 7 together. That's 1 Samuel chapter 24, verses 5 through 7. And it says, "Now it happened afterward that David's heart was troubled in him because he had cut Saul's robe. And he said to his men, 'The Lord forbid that I should do this thing to my master, the Lord's anointed, to stretch out my hand against him, seeing he is the anointed of the Lord.' And so David restrained his servants with these words, and did not allow them to rise against Saul. And Saul got up from the cave and went on his way." Now, we see some pretty neat, pretty incredible things in David here. One is that the first thing that jumps out is that his heart was troubled. Well, why? Because he cut Saul's robe. Now, in all reality, David had every right to cut more than Saul's robe. He could have cut Saul's head off. But even just cutting Saul's robe bothered David. And then he tells us why. He says, "The Lord forbid that I should do this thing to my master, the Lord's anointed, to stretch out my hand against him, seeing he is the anointed of the Lord." And this shows us the second thing we see in David here. He could have taken matters into his own hands, couldn't he? He could have gotten revenge for all that Saul had done to him. But he doesn't. Why? Because David is leaving that up to the Lord. David recognizes that the Lord has anointed Saul, and it will be the Lord who deals with Saul for his wrongdoings to David, and the Lord will deal with Saul on his time. And that's really a lesson for all of us to learn, because in this life, especially as a Christian man or woman, we will all have those Sauls that pop up in our lives. We will all have someone who's just bent on getting us, someone who just doesn't like us, someone who's going to try to hurt us and do us wrong. And there will be those opportunities where we could destroy them for it. Had David destroyed Saul that day, he would have stooped to Saul's level. he would have been no better than Saul. But David was a man after God's own heart. And we see that heart on display by the grace, the mercy, the kindness, and the love that David shows to this man who tried to harm him. And so I just want to encourage you that when you have a Saul in your life, whoever that may be, that you don't plunge your sword through him at the first opportunity you get. Rather, demonstrate to them and those around you that you too are a man or a woman after God's own heart. Jesus tells us in Matthew chapter 5, verses 43 through 45, "You have heard that it was said, 'You shall love your neighbor and hate your enemy.' But I say to you, love your enemies, bless those who curse you, do good to those who hate you, and pray for those who spitefully use you and persecute you, that you may be sons of your Father in heaven. For he makes his sun rise on the evil and on the good, and sends rain on the just and on the unjust." That's what we saw King David do in that cave. And that's what we saw King Jesus do on that cross. Therefore, be imitators of God as dear children, and walk in love, as Christ also has loved us and given himself for us, an offering and a sacrifice to God for a sweet-smelling aroma. It's all about love, guys. Hey, God bless you. Looking forward to the next time we can be together. Take care. We'll see you later.